Morning, my daughter told me to get out of my own house. The coffee was still warm on the kitchen counter. I had made it myself, the same way I had made it every morning for 41 years in that house. 2 scoops, a pinch of salt, black. I had built that kitchen counter by hand. I had laid the tiles on that floor myself, one by one, on a cold November weekend in 1987, when my daughter was still small enough to fall asleep in a laundry basket. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and her husband behind her, and she said, "Dad, we need this space. You have until Friday." I was 67 years old. I had just buried my wife 4 months earlier. My name is Gerald Whitmore. I spent 38 years as an electrician in Dayton, Ohio. I wired houses, schools, a hospital wing, a community center that still has my name on a small bronze plaque near the front entrance. I am not a complicated man. I believe in fair work, in keeping your word, and in taking care of your family no matter the cost. That last belief, I would come to learn, was the one that had quietly undone me. My wife Patricia passed in June. Pancreatic cancer, 4 months from diagnosis to the last breath. There was no time to prepare, no time to say everything that needed saying, no time to understand what her absence would mean for all the practical things that held a life together. I was swallowed whole by grief and paperwork and casseroles left on the porch by neighbors, and I barely slept for the first 2 months. My daughter Claire was there at the funeral, composed in a way that unsettled me even then. Her husband Derek stood beside her in a gray suit that was slightly too expensive for a man his age who worked in what he vaguely called investment consulting. They had been married 3 years. I had never warmed to Derek, but I had kept that to myself the way fathers do, for the sake of peace, for the sake of my daughter's happiness. 2 weeks after the funeral, Claire and Derek moved into my house. Claire presented it as a temporary arrangement. She said she wanted to be close to me during this difficult time. She said I shouldn't be alone in such a large house. I believed her, because she was my daughter, and because I was lonely in a way I had no words for, and because the house felt enormous and silent without Patricia in it. I said yes. I gave them the master bedroom because Claire said it had better light. I moved into the smaller room at the end of the hall, the one that used to be my workshop room, where I still kept a small desk and my old shortwave radio that I never used but could never bring myself to throw away. I told myself it was temporary. It was not temporary. Over the following weeks, Derek began making comments. Small ones at first. That the garage was being wasted on my old truck. That the backyard would look better if the garden beds were cleared out, Patricia's garden beds, the ones she had planted and replanted for 20 years, that still had her hand-labeled markers in the soil. That the upstairs bathroom really should be renovated, and wouldn't I want to contribute to that since I was living here? I was living here. He said it just like that. In my house of 41 years. Claire stopped arguing with him in front of me. She started finishing his sentences. I told myself I was being sensitive. That grief makes everything feel like an attack. I called my old friend Roy, who had retired the year before and moved down to Sarasota, and I told him what was happening, and Roy said, "Gerald, that doesn't sound right." But I told him I was managing fine. Then one Thursday morning in October, 5 months after Patricia's funeral, I came downstairs and found Derek sitting at my kitchen table with a folder of papers and a man I had never met. Derek introduced him as a financial advisor. He said they had been looking at the property and wanted to walk me through some options. I asked, "What options?" Derek leaned back in his chair and smiled the way he always smiled, with his teeth but not his eyes. And he said that given my age and the size of the house and the current real estate market, it might make more sense for me to consider transitioning to a smaller living situation. A senior apartment, perhaps. Or one of those active living communities, he said, making it sound appealing, like a resort. He had a brochure. I picked up the brochure. I set it back down. I told Derek that this was my house, that my name was on the deed, that I had no intention of going anywhere, and that the meeting was over. Derek's smile didn't move. He said he thought I might feel that way initially. That word. Initially. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the small room at the end of the hall, and stared at the ceiling, and I thought about Patricia and what she would have said, and I thought about Claire at 7 years old asking me to fix her bicycle, and I thought about the tiles on the kitchen floor that I had laid myself, and I felt something cold settle into my chest that had nothing to do with grief. 2 days later, Claire came to me alone. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, and she held my hands the way she used to when she wanted something as a child. And she told me that she and Derek had been talking and that they thought it would be best for everyone if I started looking at other arrangements by the end of the month. The end of the month was 18 days away. I asked her what she meant by other arrangements. She said Derek's mother might be coming to stay, and the house would be crowded, and she thought I would be happier somewhere with people my own age. I told her that this was my house. She said, "Dad," and then she stopped. And she looked at her hands, and she said that Derek had spoken to a lawyer, and that given the circumstances, there were questions about the property arrangement since they had been contributing to utilities and upkeep, and there might be some grounds. I stood up from the table. I am not a man who raises his voice. Patricia used to say that the quieter I got, the more serious things were. I got very quiet. I told Claire to stop talking. I told her that I needed to make a phone call, and that when I came back I would like her husband to be out of my kitchen. I went to the small room at the end of the hall and I closed the door, and I sat at my old desk and I opened the top drawer. Inside was a legal envelope that Patricia had given me 8 months before she died. She had handed it to me one evening while we were sitting on the back porch, and she had said, "Gerald, I want you to have this. Just keep it somewhere safe. You might need it someday, and I hope you don't, but keep it safe." I had asked her what it was. She had said, "Something a wife does for a husband she loves." I had put it in the drawer, and I had not opened it. I don't know exactly why. Maybe because opening it felt like admitting she had known something was coming, and I hadn't been ready to think about that. I opened it now. Inside was a 2-page letter from a law office in Dayton Marsh and Callaway, estate and property law. The letter was addressed to me. It explained in careful legal language that Patricia had updated and formalized several documents in the months before her passing. The house had been placed in a revocable living trust with me as the sole trustee and beneficiary. There were instructions about the terms under which any other party could claim residency. There was a number to call. There was also a handwritten note from Patricia, on the yellow legal pad paper she always used for grocery lists and phone messages. She had written, "Gerald, you are too kind for your own good sometimes. This is so no one can take what we built together. Call Robert Marsh if you ever need help. He knows everything. I love you. P." I sat at that desk for a long time. Then I called Robert Marsh. He answered on the second ring, as though he had been expecting me. He said he was glad I called and that Patricia had told him I might take a while to get around to it. He said he had a few things to share with me and asked if I could come into the office the following morning. I said I could. I drove to the office of Marsh & Callaway on a gray Tuesday morning with the legal envelope on the passenger seat and Patricia's note folded in my shirt pocket. Robert Marsh was a small man in his 60s with a precise white beard and a very calm way of speaking that I appreciated immediately. He shook my hand and poured me coffee and sat down across from me and opened a file that was considerably thicker than I expected. He told me that Patricia had come to see him 14 months before she passed. She had been concerned, he said, choosing his words carefully, about certain financial patterns she had observed. She had reviewed the household accounts. She had noticed that over the previous 2 years, a significant amount of money had moved through a joint credit line that Derek had persuaded Claire to open, one that was technically connected to household expenses but had been used, Patricia had discovered, for things that had nothing to do with the household. Robert slid a document across the desk. It was a summary of transactions. I looked at the numbers and then I looked at them again because the first time I looked I thought I had misread. $240,000. Robert said Patricia had been meticulous. She had printed bank statements, cross-referenced dates, noted pattern. She had done this quietly over several months without saying anything to me because she had not wanted to cause me pain before she knew the full picture. She had brought everything to Robert and asked him to keep it on file. She had updated the trust documents and the power of attorney and everything else Robert recommended. She had said that she hoped it would never be necessary, but that she wanted Gerald protected. That was the word Robert used. Protected. I had to put my coffee cup down because my hands were not entirely steady. I asked Robert what the money had been used for. He said that based on the documentation Patricia had gathered, and additional research his office had conducted, it appeared that Derek had been systematically routing funds through a series of small investment accounts that existed on paper but generated no actual returns. Some of the transactions had characteristics consistent with what Robert called, again, very carefully, financial elder abuse, because some of those funds had originated from accounts jointly held by me and Patricia during the period when she was ill, and I was not closely monitoring statements. The room was very quiet. I thought about Derek's brochure for the active living community. I thought about Claire holding my hands at the kitchen table. Robert told me that, at his advice, Patricia had also filed a confidential report with the Ohio Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division 14 months ago. The case had been open and under review. My contacting him now, he said, would be helpful in moving things forward, if that was what I wanted to do. I told him that was what I wanted to do. What happened over the following 6 weeks was largely out of my hands. which was a strange feeling for a man who had spent his life doing things himself. Robert filed documents with the county that formally clarified the trust arrangement on the house, which meant that Derek and Claire had no legal standing to compel me to leave or to make property decisions without my consent. A letter was sent to the house by certified mail. Derek signed for it himself, which Robert said was perfect timing. Investigators from the Attorney General's office contacted Robert's office and then contacted me directly. They were professional and thorough. I gave them everything: the bank statements Patricia had organized, the transaction summaries, dates, account numbers. They had already gathered additional documentation I hadn't known about. Derek, it turned out, had run a similar pattern with at least 2 other families in the county. Patricia had not been the only one who noticed something wrong. She had simply been the most organized. Claire did not speak to me for 3 weeks. I understood that. I grieved it, in a different way than I had grieved Patricia, but I grieved it. On a Wednesday afternoon in the second week of November, 2 investigators and a deputy sheriff arrived at the house. I was in the backyard. I had been clearing out one of Patricia's garden beds, not destroying it, just clearing the dead growth from the fall, the way she would have done herself before the first frost. I heard the knock at the front door from the backyard. I stayed in the garden. Derek was taken into custody that afternoon on 2 counts of financial fraud and 1 count of exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The last charge, Robert told me later, carried the most weight in Ohio. Claire was interviewed but not charged. She had, the investigators concluded, been largely unaware of the full scope of what Derek had been doing, though she had benefited from it. There would be a separate civil proceeding to address restitution. Claire called me that evening from her sister-in-law's house in Columbus, where she had gone to stay. She was crying in a way I had not heard since she was a child. She said she hadn't known. She said she was so sorry. She said she didn't know how she had let it happen. I told her I believed her. I told her that belief and forgiveness and trust were 3 different things, and that I had the first, was working on the second, and that the third would take time. She said she understood. We talked for a long time that night, longer than we had talked in years, and it was painful and honest in the way that necessary conversations are. And when we hung up, I sat in Patricia's chair by the window, and I felt something shift in me that I couldn't quite name. The legal process moved slowly, the way legal processes do. Derek entered a plea. Restitution proceedings began. I was not the only affected party, which made things more complicated, but Robert said the documentation Patricia had gathered made my case among the strongest. I returned the master bedroom to myself. I took Patricia's photo from the small room at the end of the hall and moved it to the nightstand. I found her garden markers in a box in the garage, every one of them labeled in her handwriting tomatoes, lavender, black-eyed Susans, the mint she could never stop from spreading, and I put them back in the garden. I called Roy in Sarasota and told him what had happened. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Patricia always was the smart one." I laughed, which surprised me. It was the first time I had laughed in months. I went back to the community center, where my name is on the bronze plaque, and signed up to teach a basic home repair workshop for seniors on the 2nd Saturday of every month. 6 people came to the first session. By the 3rd session, there were 14. A man named Vernon, who was 73 and had never owned a drill, fixed his own porch railing and brought me a photograph of it the following week. Proud as anything, and I put the photograph on the small desk in the room at the end of the hall, which I had turned back into my workshop. I don't know exactly what Patricia saw, or when she saw it, or how long she sat with what she knew before she decided to act. I know she did it quietly, without burdening me, because that was who she was. I know she walked into a lawyer's office while she was already sick, and spent her energy making sure I would be protected instead of spending that energy on herself. I know she wrote me a note on yellow legal pad paper and put it in an envelope and told me to keep it safe. I kept it safe. I just didn't know what I was keeping. What I want to say to every man my age, every person who has worked their whole life and built something with their hands and their time and their trust, is this: the documents matter, the deed matters, the trust matters. The lawyer you have never needed to call matters. Not because the people you love will betray you, most of them won't, and I choose to believe my daughter is proof of that, but because the people around them sometimes will, quietly, in the margins of monthly statements, in the fine print of accounts you stopped checking because you trusted someone to check them for you. Patricia knew this. She always paid closer attention than I did. I used to tease her about it, the way she kept every receipt, every statement, every document in labeled folders in the filing cabinet in the hall closet. That filing cabinet is still there. I haven't changed a thing about how she organized it. I've just started using it. I still make coffee every morning the same way, 2 scoops, a pinch of salt, black. I sit at the kitchen table and I look at the tiles I laid in November of 1987, and I drink my coffee, and I think about a woman who loved me carefully and wisely and planned even for the things she hoped would never happen. This is her house too. It always will be. And nobody is taking it.